Hi, everybody, and welcome to this webinar to help launch the Cocoa Accountability Map version 2.0 from Mighty Earth, and also to do a quick global stop check on where things are at in the world of traceability and mapping in the cocoa sector. As we all in the world of activism and analysis and industry and government in the cocoa space have been for the last couple of years talking about and working towards a more transparent, more traceable industry. It is a great pleasure for me today to be able to kick things off and give a little sense of where Mighty Earth has made progress and introduce a number of wonderful speakers who are all working on traceability, transparency, and mapping in the cocoa sector in ways that are extremely enriching and often somewhat synergistic. I would just ask, as a matter of housekeeping, that whoever is on the call, please mute themselves while they're not speaking so that we can have the best possible sound quality. And we will also be taking questions. Whoever wishes to put questions and comments into the chat screen can do so. When the panelists finish their little presentations, we will go on to the questions and I will moderate them. I'll try to squeeze as many of the questions in as I possibly can before we end up. And if there are questions that we don't get to today that come into the chat box, we can try to all answer them later by email when we send our recording, because this will be recorded and the recording will be sent to everyone who registered for this event. So without further ado, let me start out by telling you a little bit about the new Mighty Earth Cocoa Accountability Map. Joy, do you think that on your screen you could just open up that link to the Mighty Earth Cocoa Accountability Map, and then I will do a quick presentation of the traceability work that's been done by Trace, a wonderful organization that wasn't able to join us today, but that has made great headway. So here, as you can see on the screen, is the Cocoa Accountability Map on the Mighty Earth webpage. What's important and interesting to convey today is that we now have land use for the whole of the Ivory Coast, including, of course, palm oil, but also other commodities, thanks to Vivid Economics. And we also have deforestation alerts for the entire country, thanks to a number of different sources, including Vivid Economics, but also Global Forest Watch. The other thing that's new and different in the relaunched version of our map is that we have been able to clean and organize and do a better job of eliminating duplicates in our list of cooperatives. So you'll see on this map, all these little squares are cooperatives. Because we got a number of cocoa co-ops from different sources, there were some duplications. So we've manually eliminated thousands of duplications. We started at 8,000, we're now well under 5,000. And we'll keep trying to eliminate more and more duplicates until our final list of cooperatives is completely accurate. The third thing that's interesting about our Mighty Earth map in the new relaunched version is that nearly every major cocoa and chocolate company has now begun to disclose their supply chains. So some companies like Bahikaibu are still in the process of doing so, and Tuto. Some companies are in the midst of doing it. Like Sukden has just given us their information, part 1. Some companies have already done so, like Nestle and Hershey's. So you'll see in the co-ops, when you click on a co-op, the supply chain information for who is sourcing from that co-op. So just to sum up, our map shows you where the cocoa is, where the deforestation is, where the buying points are, the formal cooperatives, not the informal sector of Pista, and who is buying from those co-ops. It's incomplete, it's a work in progress. We'll relaunch version 3.0 around October, but that's basically our new map, and we invite everyone to play around with it and ask us any questions they have. We hope that it can be part of the push for traceability and transparency in the cocoa sector. Joy, do you think you can click on the trace button? Okay, yes, perfect. So Trace, as some of you may know, is a highly reputed organization that works on traceability of supply chains. We'll click on Data Tools. This is their website. If you just click on Data Tools and then you go to cocoa, you can see that they've begun doing traceability for all the cocoa at scale for Peru, for Colombia, and for Brazil in terms of exports. So let's just click on Peru very quickly to give you a sense of what their work looks like. It's really amazing. You can put, if you scroll down a tiny bit, you can click on flow view, and that flow view will show you where the cocoa in Peru is leaving what port, so Puerto de Callao, very important port, which company is bringing it from that port. So for example, Machu Picchu Coffee Trading Company, you can click on that. And if you click on that one, you will see where it's buying from and where it's selling to. So just to rewind, we can go back and click back to look at one more country that they have done. They have covered now the exports of Colombia as well, which is also a member of the Cocoa and Forest Initiative. When you scroll down, it gives you several options. One option which is flow view and one which is data view. Just let's click on the flow view. You can see how it works for Colombia. The data view, which is also very helpful and handy, will show you a kind of graph, a bar chart, if you will, of where the cocoa exports are going. So I think even though Trace couldn't be here today, I wanted to really tip my hat to them and emphasize how important, how beautiful, how special their work is in these countries. And I hope that, of course, Trace will be able to do this kind of supply chain traceability work for other countries. So that sums up our Mighty Earth Cocoa Accountability Map version 2.0, what's new and different in this map, and the work from Trace. And I will now hand over to our next speaker, Paola Despretz, who works with Vivid Economics. Paola is doing incredible work to map deforestation and land use in the Ivory Coast, and she will tell us a little bit not only about her work, but also her findings, which are in a report. And Paola, please take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. So I'm going to try to make this quick. I'm sure if you have any question, you can just drop them on the chat. So as Etelle mentions, we have been doing for the past 3 years loads of work in terms of land use mapping and deforestation monitoring in Ivory Coast. And I just wanted to show you what we've been up to, but also most importantly, the results of these past 3 years of hard work. So I'm first going to talk about the context, because I can imagine that most of you don't have any idea who we are, what we've been doing. So it's good to just set a bit the framework. And then I want to talk to you about the preliminary results of our land use inventory and our deforestation alert system, both in forests in rural areas, but also in protected areas, specifically in what we call forêt classée. Okay, so just to give you a bit of background, we started this project, which is actually financed by the UK Space Agency about 3-4 years ago, because we were seeing the dramatic deforestation rates that were happening in Ivory Coast, mainly due to smallholder farming, especially for cocoa. So we decided with the UK Space Agency and in partnership with the Ivorian Ministry of Planning and Development to basically build a tool that would allow to detect forest cover loss and predict areas that are at risk. So that allows us to have a system that's transparent, and that allows us to go on the ground very quickly. We started with a pilot project, which is now in use in the southwest of Ivory Coast and is currently being used by 2 agencies, OIPR and the Ministry of Water and Forests. It is currently being maintained by the Ministry of Planning and Development, so it's something purely national at this point. We've handed over everything to them. And we have decided to extend it to the rest of the country, which is why I'm here today to talk to you about this. So the tool looks like an interactive online platform, which has a land use inventory, a forest disturbance early warning system, and a deforestation risk index. So you may wonder, what does this actually look like? So I'm going to show you very quickly what it looks like. So this is a screenshot of our online platform. So this is the land use inventory, which differentiates the different types of land, which is very useful to know, because we need to know where the forest is to then be able to track where do we have potential losses of forest. And speaking of losses of forest, we're going to see here what an alert looks like. So we have in black alerts that date back from 2016 in the Southwest, and then in red, the newest alerts in 2019, 2020. So you can see on the left, you can play with the toggle. You're also allowed to download the data, GPX data, so you can go on the ground and verify very easily what is going on, what's causing this. So now I want to talk to you about the results. I want to talk to you about the fact that over the past year, we have found that Ivory Coast has lost more than 2% of its primary forest. So this is a annual deforestation rate of 2%, which is very, very important. And it represents approximately 68,000 hectares. So as of 2019, we had recorded about 3.5 million hectares of primary forest, which contrasts very, very much with the fact that there was 15% of forest in 1986. You may wonder, where is actually the deforestation happening? So there's two elements of this. 75% of these losses take place actually in rural areas. So that means these forests are not protected. They are the property of communities of people living in the neighboring areas. And then 21% of the losses took place in what we call forêts classées, which are one of the two types of protected areas. And as you all know, most of this deforestation, actually 68% of it, took place between January and February 2020. So this means we have a really small window every year to tackle deforestation. So here on the right, you can see the area of focus at the moment by the media is much on the southwest of the country, which is called the Cocoa Belt. Very understandably, we'll see why. But also, I just want to show you that there's another area that requires increased focus. And this is one of the results of accurate mapping work. So as you can see, we've had loads of losses of primary forest in rural areas, and most of them actually happened in the center east of the country. As you can see in this map, it is one of the latest reservoirs of very dense and intact forest, which is probably one of the reasons why people are so interested in these areas. There's really good soil, there's really good climate regulation, which is great for culture, be it of cocoa, but also cashew nuts. So this is something that's really overlooked, and I really urge people who work in the area to consider having a look at what's going on in the center east of the country. Another look at what's going on in terms of rural areas, this time in the southwest of Côte d'Ivoire, where loads of cocoa farming is happening. So because we've started this a pilot in the southwest of Ivory Coast, we can see that in 2016, we found that the region of Bleu-les-Gains, the department actually of Bleu-les-Gains, had quite a lot of remaining forest cover, but that 3 years later, that forest cover has been halved and replaced by cocoa. So it's very clear so we've seen from 2016 up to 2019, we've been detecting alerts saying that the forest cover was dramatically decreasing. And as a result, we see in 2019 that these alerts were accurate, and that actually the forest that had disappeared was replaced by cocoa. So that really highlights the need for a forest monitoring system. I would like to move on now to protected areas, so legally protected areas. Here we're again in the southwest of Côte d'Ivoire, where there's very much increased focus at the moment. And we can see there's two classified areas. And we can see that the forest that...
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We have only one more minute and we have to go to our next speaker.
That's fine. That's the end of it, actually. So we can see that the forest on top has lost 40% of its surface, of the forest surface, over the past 3 years. Whereas the one below, Forêt de Cavally, is actually, the deforestation rates have actually slowed down, which is probably due to the amazing work that Earthworm and Airbus are doing with Trends of Deforestation. So that leaves me basically with a conclusion, the next steps, just basically ground truthing the alerts to see what is going on with the forestry agencies. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Paola. And this is a perfect transition for our next speaker, who is Jérôme Tokpa, coming to us from the Ivory Coast, from the NGO called Earthworm, formerly known as the Forest Trust. And he's going to be speaking about mapping and actions to fight deforestation in Cavally, which is where Paola ended her presentation, and how Earthworm is working with Airbus in this region. So I think it's a great synergy. And Jérôme, without further ado, let me hand it over to you. Take us away.
Yeah. Thank you very much. My name is Jérôme, as Etelle said. I'm happy to take the word now because Etelle started presenting, the situation Ivory Coast, and then Paola went a little bit deeper in the different focus areas, and now we are going in the Cavally Forest Reserve. I don't know if I don't want to present from here because I have only 5 minutes, but if you guys are interested in knowing more about what we do, please, at the end of the presentation, you have my address. Next slide. Next slide, Joyce. Okay, again here very quickly, the trend, the deforestation trend in Ivory Coast is alarming since 1960 to 2015. You can see that we lost more than 13.5 million of hectares, and it's something about 272,000 hectares of forest per year that we are losing. I think Paola spoke about that. Next slide. And one of the key drivers of the deforestation in Ivory Coast is, of course, agriculture. And within the agriculture, the commodity that is driving this deforestation is cocoa, with almost 38%. Next slide. So one of the key challenges the government of Ivory Coast is still facing, is actually the new technique that the farmers have developed in the forest reserve. They want to hide, they're hiding themselves. They know that, planting in the forest reserve is not allowed. So what they do is to plant under the canopy, and when the cocoa plants are growing, then they can start cutting the trees or putting the fire at the back of the trees, like you can see on the picture on your left, for instance. It is next slide. When we meet the SODEFOR in 2017, the SODEFOR clearly told us, look, if it is to see the clearance of forest, open canopy, I don't have any problem with that. I can use drones, I can use to discover that. But my challenge today is to save the forest, and saving the forest is when we can see the forest disturbance or forest degradation under the canopy. So we use with Airbus, we use a lot of techniques to be able actually to get to the point that we can see the forest disturbance under the canopy. So, you know, merging a lot of technology, optic imageries with radar imageries and things like that. And we were able to see what is going on under the canopy. And like you can see here, the degraded forest was on the base map we produced in 2018, January 2018. You could see that we have 7% of forests that are, degraded forests. And it's where really we put sort of to say, look, if it is, they are now putting the cocoa seed under the canopy, maybe it is where we can save the forest. Next slide. And you can see when we started in 2018 with the base till end of 2019, we can see that the deforestation decreased. However, we didn't stop the deforestation. And you can even see that in the last quarter of 2019, we have an increase in the deforestation. So the idea for us is, okay, we are doing the monitoring, satellite monitoring, things like that. But at the end of the forest, like Paola said, like Etelle said, forest is still disappearing. So what can we do? And it's one of the reasons why, from what we observe on the ground, with next slide, we came with a project where we could really where we asked companies, where we asked also the government to come together and 1 minute left, I don't know. To come together and build something more sustainable. And we built from the result we had, we built 4 pillars where we think that we can move forest area that we still have. The second was, how can we restore actually the degraded area? The third one is, how can we find a kind of transition pathway to the people who are farming in the forest reserve? And how can we actually develop the kind, with the farmers at the periphery of the forest reserve, develop their resilience so that they can take ownership of the forest, but also, you know, we can increase the productivity because of the low productivity of the cocoa, that people are still looking for more land to plant cocoa, actually. So we are looking for partnership, okay, this time, partnership, and and it's the reason why I'm happy today that we are really here together, and I hope that there's really possibility, because I can see that Vivid Economic is in the area, Mighty Heads doing also some great work. So I think that we can really put our strength together to move forward in better protecting forests and people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jérôme. Thank you, Jérôme. Oh yeah, let's keep this slide up so people can see Jérôme's contact information while I introduce the next person. So yeah, just to kind of draw a line between what I was saying and Paola and now Jérôme, I think it's very clear that there's just tremendous headway that's been made in the monitoring and the mapping. But the question that I think I hear coming out of Paola's talk, and also very clearly from Jérôme, is how do we turn the monitoring into action? And Jérôme was beginning to talk about the way that monitoring goes hand in hand with action in Cavally, and that this is kind of what helps to unlock the change that we all wish to see. And so on that note, I will move to our next speaker. And we're heading now from Ivory Coast, just next door to Ghana. We are joined by Sarah Middlemiss from Ecometrica. And Sarah is going to present about her work, or rather Ecometrica's work, apologies, Ecometrica's work in monitoring, satellite monitoring and mapping in Ghana. So Sarah, without further ado, I hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Etelle. Yeah, so it might be a slightly different thing. It's more talking about the projects and how we've been working with the Forestry Commission. So just to give you a very brief introduction as to sort of who Ecometrica are, we're based in the UK. We're a sustainability reporting and environmental measurement company. So we take data from various sources, be that satellites or other sort of non-spatial data, and combine it in our software to produce reports for companies and governments and NGOs. And one of the projects that we've been leading for the past 3 to 4 years is something called Forest 2020. So if we get the next slide, please, Joy. So just a little bit of background. So Forest 2020 is supported by the UK Space Agency, and the goal is to support and improve forest monitoring systems across 7 countries in the tropics. So as well as working in West Africa, we're working in Latin America and Indonesia. And all countries have sort of similar challenges and themes. So being able to effectively detect change in forest, identifying where risk of loss is and also opportunities for restoration, and also the idea of kind of being able to effectively manage and curate that data so it leads to action, as Etelle was saying earlier. So in every country, we're partnering with local institutions, a combination of government agencies, typically an agency who has the mandate for forest monitoring, but also with a research institution, and where possible, sort of an NGO or a consultant who's in country and can support that kind of adoption and technology transfer almost. The focus, oh sorry, back a bit. So the focus is always on kind of like long-term tools and sustainability. So in Ghana, we've been working with RMSC, which is the technical wing of the Forestry Commission, and also the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. So one of the kind of key challenges and priorities in Ghana was obviously this idea of sort of disaggregating cocoa from natural forests. In particular, I think as Jérôme mentioned, there's huge issues because as well as having monococoa, you also have a lot of shade-loving cocoa where it's planted beneath the canopy, and disaggregating that from natural forests is quite technically challenging. And as we started in 2017, this was also the policy context of the signing of the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, this joint commitment between both government and the private sector. So there was real momentum, which I think helped kind of push it forward. In terms of the kind of innovation, there's a lot in terms of new processing techniques to produce these cloud-free mosaics. Also a real challenge in Ghana. It's a very cloudy country, using a combination of Landsat and Sentinel-2 data plus extensive field campaigns for validation. We also established digital infrastructure, so the Ecometrica platform, to support the kind of the curation and the dissemination of these national data sets. It's worth noting that I put it here, capacity building is key, and local ownership of tools, methods, data has always been a kind of key part of the Forest 2020 project. So the data sets that have been produced are all kind of owned and really produced by the Forestry Commission in Ghana, supported by KNUST in country. So we perhaps get the next slide. So I think there's time. What I can do is share my screen and actually just kind of show the cocoa map on the platform. Hopefully this works. Fingers crossed. There we go.
I'm crossing my fingers.
Thank you. There we go. Click share. So hopefully you can see that. So this is the latest version of the cocoa segregation map. So as I said, this has been produced by the Forestry Commission with support from KNUST in Ghana. So I should probably top this off by saying that I am not the data scientist or expert on this. So if you do have any technical questions about the data, the link to this is in the slides, which I'm sure will get distributed, and you can direct questions directly to Prince or Yukubu or George, who produced the map. So the map has 9 classes, and you can see both the sort of monococoa, cocoa agroforestry, as well as the closed forest and open forest. So as you can see, we've got just the kind of the data layers here, which I think obviously, this is the sort of baseline map of which you can then sort of monitor change over the top. What we also have are the admitted farms. So these are farms in Ghana which have been established within national parks but are sort of legally allowed. So obviously any expansion of this would need to be monitored and then sort of intervention required. But how the kind of the platform works within these areas of interest, you can then click on them, and hopefully this works for me, mine should hold up. And it basically queries the data, so it can pull out within that area, well, exactly how much cocoa is there, cocoa agroforestry, open forest, that kind of thing. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, just what the data looks like. We could just go quickly back to the slides. I have one more. Sorry, Joy, logistical nightmare for you.
Do you want me to go ahead and do it, or will you?
Yes, yeah, if you could, thanks. Thank you. So yeah, just the next slide. So just finally to top it off, as much as we've been working with the Forestry Commission, we're also sort of cognizant that this is a public-private commitment. It's not just the government that has a sort of a need to monitor and a need to act, the cocoa companies also. So we have an MOU with the Forestry Commission that we can use this data to provide these services to cocoa companies so they can actually understand what's happening in the supply chain. So we can essentially overlay all of the areas of the supply chain over these data sets, but also include other data sets. So whether it's the Global Forest Watch annual forest loss, looking at proximity to protected areas, that kind of thing. And the idea is to produce a kind of oversight of what's happening. But I'm very aware that I'm now out of time, but obviously happy to answer any questions when the time comes. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And sorry to be a ruthless timekeeper, but I want to make sure we get through all the different wonderful presentations, which brings me to the next one. We're joined by Danielle Abu from the NGO Tropenbos, which is an environmental NGO that does quite a bit of mapping around the world and forest protection work. And Danielle will speak about their work at Tropenbos, Ghana on mapping, deforestation, and cocoa, and an investigation and report. So without further ado, over to you, Danielle. And you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, just a minute. I did share the presentation, but
would you want Joy to push your slides, or are you okay doing your slides?
yes. Joy should push it through. Hello, Joy.
Oh, Joy doesn't have your slides, Danielle. But if you have your slides, oh, you did send it. Okay, let me just. Why don't you start, and I'll find the slides, and we'll get them up and running. But you can start even without the slides. Just tell us a little bit about your work, and we'll get them up.
So basically, we, as an organization that is interested in things that were happening within our forests, we sort of set out some consultancies and establish some benchmarks to identify we wanted to find out what was going on within some select forest reserves. First of all, the trace selected forest reserves were the Sui River, the Tunnel of Fin, and then the Krokosoa Hills. We selected this in particular reference to where Tropenbos was working, which is the Western North. One, the major reason for the exercise, one is to assess whether indeed cocoa, we do have incidents of cocoa-led deforestation. Are these some incidents of admitted farms expanding? And are they some satellite analysis that we could do to find out whether indeed, from our perspective, we could have some of these issues brought forward so that we can start resolving them. So one, we identified that for all the trail reserves, deforestation was increasing at alarming rates, averagely about 700%. And for us, that was very, very scary. And for the period, now the entire study has been structured in sequence. We have a first decade which starts from 2001 to 2010. Then the current, the other half was another decade which starts from 2010 to 2020, the current year.
Can I interrupt
Hello?
you very quickly? Joy and I are going through all of our messages and we don't have your slides, but if you have your slides on your screen, it's no problem. You can just put them up on your computer, open your PowerPoint, and Joy will give you the shared authorization to show.
All right. So it's on my computer.
It's on your computer. Is it open now?
Yes, it's open.
Okay, great. So Joy, if you push share screen, and now Daniel, you can just push share screen. You see the little button at the bottom center of your screen. It just, it's a green icon with the little arrow and it says share screen. It's a square. Voila. Perfect. We did it. Okay. So sorry to interrupt you, Daniel. I will add on more time accordingly. I apologize for this. Please keep going.
Yeah, so as I said, this was a project that was being supported by the EU, and apparently what we sought to do a descriptive analysis of some underlying drivers within cocoa encroachment in some selected forest reserves in Ghana. And I did say that we selected 3 forest reserves: Crocosua Hills, Sui, and Tanofin. Now, what we realized was that from the analysis, we did some satellite analysis, which was done by Visiotera, using some shape files from the relevant state institutions. We realized that deforestation was increasing at an alarming rate. Admitted farms for us has increased within that same period. We are looking at a threshold of just 2 decades. About since the way gazetted, that's about 3 or 4 decades ago. Some of them have increased by an average of 15%, and that was very worrying for us. And to the effect that some admitted farms have turned into communities, as you could see from the pictures. Now, so this is the satellite analysis of deforestation that was detected. I wouldn't throw much on this. If you need details of this, you could find that in a policy brief of the Tropinbos Ghana website. But of course, the situation is very precarious. And if you look at the detected deforestation for the period between 2001 to 2010, you would see that Crocosua Hills, the increase is about 3.3. And it has increased from that figure to almost 31% in terms of area loss. And the same for almost all the 3 reserves that were analyzed. These are the figures for the admitted farms. When you look at the analysis that we have done based on the satellite imagery and other full truthing that we've done, in total, averagely, the admitted farms have lost close to almost 15,000%. And for us, this is very scary. And as a civil society organization that is interested in research, we thought that some of these things will need to be addressed. So in conclusion, we gave some recommendations that were clearly indicated in our policy brief, that government must openly, first of all, admit that this is a challenge. Until there's that admission, then we are not moving anywhere. Because at the end of it, if we do not admit that this is indeed a challenge, we cannot together have a solution for that. And we believe that Cocoa Board should also start looking at sourcing from certified farms. I mean, they are doing this. There's CFI and other strong initiatives that are going on. But of course, we will need to stick to some level of traceability protocols. And we believe that chiefs will be a bigger anchor in terms of getting these incidents arrested. And the private sector should also take interest in some restoration related activities. We also believe that Forestry Commission should be equipped. We understand the challenges that they are facing. We believe that when they are well equipped, they can in a way help address some of these issues. And government must also be bold in taking core actions, especially relating to the resettlement plans that was issued out in 2017. So in effect, this is just a study that Tropinbos did, and It is our hope that these will resonate some discussions and we can all get to a point where we will address some of these very unfortunate situations that are going on in our dear forest. Thank you.
Daniel, thank you for your masterful presentation and your patience with our technological challenge. You were so unflappable. So a big thank you to you, and also for a very interesting presentation that I think dovetailed so nicely with what Sarah was saying, because Sarah was showing the big overview map and then pointing out that one of the elements inside the map was this ability to toggle on and off the farms of the kind that you're talking about. What you've done is you've really taken us into a deep dive into these this very specific problem, which is really a high-risk problem. So it's quite interesting to see how this work is synergistic and dovetails. And that brings me to another group whose work dovetails in an interesting way with what has just been described by Sarah and by Daniel on Ghana. So now we're transitioning from Ghana only to Ghana and Cameroon. And we are joined by Niels Wielaert from Satelligence, who's going to speak about Satelligence's mapping of deforestation and of cocoa in Ghana and Cameroon. Niels, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you. So just a short introduction about us. For those who don't know us, we work on de-risking agriculture commodity supply chains using satellite imagery. So we work on satellite powered geodata analytics, especially for agricultural performance and supply chain risks like deforestation, but also fires and flooding. We're based in Utrecht, but we also have an office in Ghana. We have an office in Indonesia and in South America. And we work especially on palm oil, soy and rubber. And in this case, today we'll be talking about cocoa. Those are the key commodities we monitor. We use satellite imagery, radar imagery, optical imagery, and local ground information over full supply chains. So we don't really focus on Ghana alone. We focus on the full, in this case, cocoa global supply chain and detecting trends and patterns, anomalies. So we work with radar and other satellite imagery that's available at 7-meter resolution, which is nice because then we can also detect, for example, logging patterns. As you can see here in this forest reserve in Ghana, you can see a pattern of yellow to red, which means that every week we get in new data. Every day we get in new satellite images. So we can detect trends from the 1980s and at this type of detail since 2015, so that we can track all the progress. And for this, we would like to share our latest results, in this case for Ghana for the past 2 years, where we report, in this case, every month based on daily imagery. What we see, and it's not uncommon, we see a clear increase in clearing in Ghana during this COVID situation. That's not uncommon because it's unfortunately also the case for soy in Brazil. We see it in palm landscapes in Indonesia. And now we see that there is also, if we compare to past year, an increase. So how is that? Is that related to cocoa, or are there also other risks at stake? If we zoom in, we do see that based on the signal from the satellites, we can see this is the darkest areas, by the way, are the past year. So we can immediately see that there's also very big clearings. More on this later. If we have a look at high potential cocoa risk, we see that Krokosua area and Tano-Offin remain big areas in these circles to worry about, where we would need cooperative effort to go on the ground and mitigate the situation. How do we know it's cocoa? Because of the landscape position and our risk mapping. In this new circle that you see at the bottom, that is the Upper Wausau Reserve. There we know from the satellite signal that it's mainly mining. This whole reserve is being ravaged by mining. Unfortunately, there's more examples like this one. these big areas, including Assenau, and Suli River, yes. What is very interesting here is that these patches are so large. So we think it's rather unlikely that that's due to cocoa. If it's so huge, they are more than 10 times as big as the usual cocoa farms. So what I mean to show with this is that we see this increase in Ghana. We know where these patches are. Now we need to follow up on the ground to see, okay, what is cocoa related, what is other commodity related, and mitigate the situation and do it together. There's another landscape that we're working on. As I said, we work around the world, but in this case, we work with IDH and WWF on the Green Commodity Landscape Program to map this area in Cameroon, among others, the Grand Mabam area. And you immediately see that this is a kind of a different situation. There's a lot of primary forest left, a lot of forest. And I think that's also one of the key messages, that here we have an opportunity to protect more high forest and promote agroforestry, agroforest cocoa. If we look at the deforestation, you can barely not see it, but this front here is not related to cocoa. There's no cocoa around it. But these two areas, that's where in the brown area, there's a lot of cocoa, which currently is still a lot under the canopy. But this at least pinpoints areas for focus. So that brings me to the final conclusions of this short presentation, that I think in Ghana, we see a recent strong increase in large-scale clearing and forest reserve. But we also see, by the way, that this clearing is outside the reserve. So we think that the trees outside the reserve should not be forgotten, but also have clear strategies for those. In Cameroon, we see a great opportunity for maintaining high forest cover with agroforestry cocoa, and also that deforestation is more concentrated in areas, so that the mitigation follow-up pathways can be rather concrete and localized. In general, there's many organizations as represented here in this talk also that work on monitoring. What we see as good takeaways is, let's cooperate, for example, on the harmonization between the different countries. Can we find common areas, just like I showed, and also before me, Chopenbos, the area, the big patches, the big clearings, what is that? Can we find common trends that are detected by multiple systems to have higher certainty on what's really going on the ground? Do other service providers also see these similar trends across multiple systems? And whether we can jointly verify these areas on the ground. The more we can do that with all the stakeholders, with civil society, with the companies, with the government, of course, the better. So let's cooperate. It's the last slide.
Wonderful. So I'll leave that up a little bit while I introduce our next speaker, so people can just take note of Niels's contact. Niels, thank you so much for flagging this. I feel like you're really speaking to a leitmotif that has emerged in all of our conversations, which is the need for synergy, the need for cooperation, the need for systems that can be speaking to one another instead of mutually unintelligible and siloed, and the kind of overwhelming, maybe even catastrophic nature of the deforestation that's appearing, and how we really need all hands on deck. And so the question is, I think, how can we all best cooperate, as you said, to hone in on the most high-risk areas? And just to speak to something Jérôme and Sarah and Paola said, and also, of course, Daniel, how can we move from mapping to action and do it together in a way that's joined up, coherent, effective? And I'll introduce our next speaker with another bridge, because not only you were evoking some leitmotifs that have emerged in the previous talks, Niels, but also something you mentioned is really important in what will come out of James's presentation, which is not only the question of mapping and eliminating deforestation for cocoa, but also mapping and eliminating forest degradation for cocoa. That's also something that kind of emerged a little bit in Paola and Jérôme and Daniel's talk and yours. So what do we do as not only to cope with monocropping coming in and replacing forests, but what do we do when forests are thinned for agroforestry cocoa? And is that sometimes a precursor to going to monocropping, or is it a precursor to just staying with agroforestry, but nonetheless a substantial forest loss? And I should also say as a parenthesis, Mighty Earth believes that we shouldn't have either legal or illegal deforestation for cocoa, because cocoa's already been so responsible historically for such massive forest degradation and forest loss that at this point, no trees should be cut down really for cocoa, whether it's in degradation or deforestation. So on that note, I will pass it over to James Ackworth, who's a mapping expert and a research, a very prominent researcher on deforestation and forest protection, to speak about mapping in Cameroon and specifically this question of agroforestry and forest degradation. Over to you, James.
Thank you very much. I'll quickly reintroduce myself as actually more of a, I'm not really a mapping expert, but more on land use and forestry. And I'm approaching this from the perspective of what cocoa means for degradation and carbon emissions, and what potential responses one may have, including mapping, amongst other things. So first of all, if I can get my own screen to work, which I have to, I think I have to go to here, don't I? For some reason it's not wanting to move forward. There you go. So first of all, a reminder of what's going on in Cameroon. The national strategy is to double cocoa production by 2020, which won't be achieved because we're only at 264,000 tons a year last year, and the target is 600,000 tons. I'm going to move quite quickly because of time. You can look at some of these figures later. But this is a national strategy and is still being pursued in various sectoral strategies. So what's going on with deforestation? So I'm going to move this around a bit, haven't I? How can I close that? There you go. In terms of deforestation, it has been fairly steady from 2001 to 2012, and then there seems to be a huge jump from then onwards. But in fact, I think that may be to do with the introduction of Landsat 8 data by GFW and Hansen in their data set, and maybe doesn't reflect actual vast increases in deforestation, but more the ability to detect more small, fine-scaled forest loss that was actually historical. So it's quite hard to determine the trend. Forest degradation is a much more important source of total emissions than people realize. This is a study by Pearson et al. In 2017, which estimated 34% of total forest emissions come from degradation as distinct from deforestation. And they only covered logging, fire, and fuel wood in their estimate. And they were estimates, not measurements, but that was one of the few sort of international studies available. In 2017, in the options analysis study done by the Ministry of Environment, another estimate was done by a team, which I was one. Sophia, who's online, was the team lead. And the estimate shows that, in fact, half of total emissions are actually coming from degradation as opposed to deforestation. And of that half, cocoa is by far the biggest part, both historically and projected into the future. So there is a high risk of increasing degradation through cocoa expansion. If you assume that one just carried on business as usual, currently Cameroon's cocoa is not very system is not very productive. 300 kilos a hectare is considered about the national average. So if you want to get another 335,000 tons of cocoa, you'd need more than 1 million hectares, and that would emit over 100 million tons of carbon and over 400 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Those are my estimates, and they're not verified or published, but they are the best estimates that we could produce. Full sun cocoa, i.e. after total deforestation, is very uncommon, and that's because there's lots of non-permanent forest land, and farmers are mostly interested in securing tenure on as much land as possible, i.e. creating a land bank for their future generations. So low intensity, low productivity farming is not a problem for them. And I think the obvious point to raise is this is what Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire looked like 30 to 50 years ago. And now what we're seeing in Cameroon is them, if you like, following suit, but the trend is the same. So shade management in old, over-mature cocoa agroforest is one of the key strategies to increase yields per hectare by both the Ministry of Agriculture and its public-private partners, donors and private sector. And old cocoa agroforests have large, high carbon stocks of nearly up to 200 tons a hectare. But to improve yields per hectare on existing farms, typically the advice is to reduce carbon stocks in the overstory to more or less 70 tons a hectare to reduce shade and competition. And that is a huge source of degradation, and a massive increase in emissions can result from purely just managing old agroforests without even clearing new land. So intensification of lots of existing low yielding cocoa farms is an issue. It's not that it, if you like, solves a problem. It might, better management and better systems might reduce emissions slightly compared to the business as usual, but they will still increase substantially. Just as an example, this is in the same grand and bam landscape that Niels was just talking about. That's what a cocoa agroforest looks like when you're aiming for a higher yield. Most of the canopy's gone and all of the understory has gone, and you're getting 500 to 1,000 kilos of cocoa per hectare, but with a big cost in terms of loss of carbon and biodiversity. So there is an optimum somewhere between. Yep.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, just one more minute.
Okay, there is an optimum somewhere between yield per hectare and carbon stocks per hectare, and typically that is met somewhere around the 70 tons a hectare of carbon stocks. You can have a look at this later, but on the left is Cameroon, on the right is Brazil, and the figures are more or less showing the same thing. So why is this important? It's because degradation was actually included in the Climate Change Accord, and it's also part of the commitments made in the Statement of Intent for the Cocoa Forest Initiative. However, the companies who are implementing this have conveniently dropped references to degradation in their own statements. And in the, if I skip to the next one, in the national framework, deforestation, in the INDC also mentions degradation, but the roadmap for deforestation-free cocoa, which IDH, WWF and the ministries and government are putting together, focuses much more on stopping deforestation in the permanent forest domain, but does not stop degradation outside of the non-permanent forest. And this is important because if we don't actually address degradation outside of the permanent forest domain, we end up where you are in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire very soon. And we need better definitions of degradation. We need better definitions of, for example, in the action plan, if in the non-permanent forest domain, we're aiming for more environmentally friendly and approaches that favor maintenance of forest cover, we need to know what those mean and how we monitor them. So in terms of monitoring, I'm going to skip again, sorry. There are obviously, what we've just heard from Ghana, some useful methods for monitoring deforestation and degradation, both from sat-urgence and ecometric, and I'm glad these are being rolled out in Cameroon. But the key questions, and this is the last slide, so are cocoa companies actually committed to eliminate and reduce forest degradation or only deforestation? And if we are to address degradation in the roadmap and its implementation, then it must be monitored and monitorable. So the questions really are, can time series of sentinel data sets, combined Landsat or other, identify changes in forest density that allow us to monitor it and to reward or sanction it? And can you actually detect the cause of degradation? Is it cocoa? Is it other crops? Does it even matter if it's all part of the same farming system? And I leave those questions on the table because I think it will raise lots of questions for the rest of the discussion. There are some recommendations there which I won't come to. I'll skip because we can discuss them later. And I'll say thank you very much.
Thank you so much, James. I think you have posed some really excellent questions, and I would just chime in to say, not only can we, but I think the answer is we must figure out a way to map, monitor, and sanction forest degradation for cocoa, as well as deforestation for cocoa. And that brings me to our next speaker, because there's a really interesting element, I think, of a link between what James was just presenting and what Vitor França Lopes dos Santos from Imaflora will present for us next on mapping cocoa, deforestation, and forest degradation in Brazil, and also on mapping forest restoration from completely degraded pasture lands to agroforestry systems. Of course, Brazil is very famous for agroforestry and for cabruca. So without further ado, I hand it over to Vitor from Imaflora.
All right, thank you. But first, before beginning, I want to tell you all that I'll be speaking more about how cocoa here in the region of Amazon that we are working in the southern Amazon, the cocoa has become an agent of conservation and restoration of the forest, right? It's not as much as mapping as everyone here. So first, I would like to thank the invitation from Mighty Earth for the opportunity to share with you here how we're working against the forces of Amazon deforestation in southern region of Pará state in Brazil. Because in Amazon, we have cocoa in Pará state mainly, all right, in Bahia and Pará. And I'm talking about one of the regions most affected by deforestation in the past 20 years, like most of the Amazon. Here, the region was first invaded for the removal of hardwoods, and with those no longer existing in the region by 2000s, and with stronger laws being approved, the principal reason for cutting down forests became the illegal mining we have till today, and agriculture expansion, more specifically the livestock expansion. Right? So we, Imaflora, we have been working in the southern region of Pará for the last 10 years with several financiers. Projects started here with a sustainability program for shaded cocoa crops with smallholders cocoa farmers. Here in Brazil, we call it family farmers. We have specific laws for family farmers. It is a region that has the number of cattle in Brazil is the highest. So the region with the largest number of cattle in Brazil is here. One of the cities has almost 2.5 million cattle. So, and majority for exportation. In this picture in the left, you can see how we are working with agroforestry cocoa along with the pasture, all right? So from 1990s onwards, there was a big jump in the local rural population encouraged by agricultural reform enforced to cut down forests for entry of pasture, since the Brazilian government was encouraging cattle raising for exportation. With this fact, there are two important aspects to highlight after that. At the same time that the pastures became unproductive with many pests and diseases, family farmers with little technical support, they capitalized for a pasture reform, among other factors, helped big farmers from all over regions of Brazil to see an opportunity to buy cheap land. And with that, large farms of cattle mainly began to take over from family farmers or smallholders, right? And at the time, in the 1990s, 2000, SEPLAC, a Brazilian scientific organization for cocoa, was already encouraging the planting of cocoa in the Amazon region for being native. So the main plague that took down Bahia's cocoa, the witch's boom, would not have as much impact here once it was planted in partnership with other native trees, thus initiating a planted cocoa together with other trees in areas previously degraded to pasture. So it can be said that here in the entire region of southern Pará, cocoa is an important tool for controlling deforestation and an essential source of income for farming families, okay? So here, Imaflora arrives and faced with farmers in shaded cocoa areas, but without much capital to increase and improve their cocoa agroforestry. So we took project of environmental and financial sustainability with the locals cooperative. It's important to say about a normative instruction from 2019 that established that through a forest restoration project with commercial agroforestry system, family farm property can have this area recognized as a legal reserve. So it's important for agroforestry systems since the local government recognized that despite being an area for income generation, it is also an area for environmental conservation and recovery.
Querido Vitor, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but there's only 1 minute.
All right. So like I said, agroforestry systems have become a great ally of Amazon restoration and generating income for producing families, okay? So just to finally talk about projects and also the cocoa chain, we have here different financiers and stakeholders working on it. So it's important to say that even Cargill's and other Holland, they have projects here that finances not only us, but others NGOs to projects of sustainability, certification, traceability, and even project to land use mapping of producers. So we could do a environmental restoration of these producers up along 3 years, 5 years, whatever we have time for it.
Thank you so much, Vitor. Just for anybody who wants to see the mapping that Imaflora has done of cocoa, we will be having another webinar in October, and hopefully at that time we'll be able to go into more depth about some of the wonderful mapping work that's been done to map Brazilian cocoa and deforestation. So this is just your first taste for all of you who are our listeners today. We'll go deeper in October. And also, because we're a bit over time and we still have one speaker and I want to leave some room for Q&A, I saw that there are many hands raised. I would ask everyone who's raised their hand, could you please type your question into the chat box for all to see? And Joy will compile the questions. We'll try to get through as many of them as we can, but the ones that we can't get through in today's session, we will answer in writing when we send the recording and when we send the slides as well. So now I'm going to hand it over to Natalie Walker of the National Wildlife Federation. Natalie is going to speak a bit about how many of these different strands come together. We've heard about mapping and traceability work in the Ivory Coast, in Ghana, in Cameroon, in Brazil. And you know, of course, mapping is a good thing in and of itself. It's good to have traceability and transparency in mapping. But Natalie, I think, will be able to weave together for us some of how all the different mapping and traceability initiatives can come together in joint monitoring mechanisms, because the National Wildlife Federation has studied joint monitoring mechanisms for cocoa and other commodities, including the soy and the beef that Vitor was alluding to. So Natalie, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here, especially after all these really interesting presentations. And I know in the interest of time, I want to be a little bit brief, but just to say, I think as Etelle mentioned, we've seen great amounts of data and there's always more that we can do. Of course, this issue of degradation is really important and some challenges, but just to talk about what we've learned overall is that you can make really big gains very quickly by implementation. And I would suggest that a way to, you know, rather than waiting for the pieces that we don't have, there's enough data to understand, to actually start implementing. And we've seen, you know, we heard about very high deforestation rates and all the climate challenges that this is bringing. And as everyone knows, right, it's irreversible damage. So while there are, rather than, don't let, our lessons are that don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And there's a number of examples from other commodities and regions that we've seen that have been very successful by putting in place quite crude implementation systems at first, which have then become more sophisticated. So, for example, the soy moratorium in the Brazilian Amazon in 2006, they didn't have property boundaries. The data for soy resolution was 30 by 30, so you have a lot better. Many places for cocoa. And what they just did was map new deforestation for soy. They got the entire industry together to agree not to buy after a cutoff date. And they all agreed on an implementation, and they agreed on the monitoring system. They agreed who would do it. There was a time where it was overseen by government, and then it wasn't. But they held together and had a number of benefits. So like I said, they could have spent another few years developing something more sophisticated, and it has evolved over time. But the joint mechanism was very effective because, first of all, it was very cost effective. It was using the monitoring system Brazil already had. What they did is include detection of soy, which wasn't there before. They didn't know who was there. They couldn't identify people. So when they found production that was non-compliant with the agreement, they would go visit the farm. So at some point that was government, and then it wasn't, to try and figure out who that was and ensure that everybody agreed not to buy. That really helped with implementation, because I think one of the things which is often challenging when you have a new system of compliance is, how will farmers react? Will they agree? Will they get angry? Will it affect the business relationships? And really, that's another benefit of this joint mechanism, because everyone's working together, and they see it, blame the retailer, or blame, there's a lot of ways that you can this can be communicated. I think good communication obviously is really key with producers, so they understand why this is happening, and they're shown data that it doesn't need to, you need to be able to show that it doesn't have to affect industry negatively as long as they respond. So that's something else we saw. Obviously, there's specificities about cocoa that we don't want to lead to a model which potentially has higher yields, as we heard, but actually have negative consequences overall. So that has to be considered, and there has to be a path. And I think there's great groups who we heard from today who could do this, a path towards sustainability. But just to say that these simple tools can be really effective. We found, there's a paper hopefully to come out very soon, but a massive avoided deforestation by the soy moratorium, over 14,000 square kilometers. And that's including people worried about displacement and leakage, and that's accounting for all of that. So just to say that a simple tool, when everyone works together, can really work. And of course, if you have an agreement towards continuous improvement and reviews, if there are problems and challenges, you can overcome them. But I think, given the urgency, it's really important to act now, especially as I'm sure everybody knows that there's potential legislation in a number of countries about imports. The sooner a system can be implemented, the more, if there are challenges, those can be communicated to governments. Whereas if you hang back and don't implement, then importing governments can be, without data, they'll be implementing systems which may not be the best for the industry. So I think now, now there's every reason to act in a unified way.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for these insights about how we can take all of the different monitoring, mapping, and traceability mechanisms and plug them and funnel them into joint monitoring mechanisms that can really have teeth and have an impact on stopping deforestation on the ground, given the urgency that I think we all feel. We're in a climate chaos situation, mass extinction. 80% of the world's insects appear to be gone, probably. So we're all feeling, I think, very anxious about what the future holds and eager to find solutions that are robust as fast as possible. So yeah, that was very insightful and interesting. Thank you. And I see now that there have been a number of questions popped into our chat. There's one question which I don't know how to answer. So I saw that we're lucky to have been joined today by Caroline Winchester of Global Forest Watch, so a great expert on mapping commodities, including cocoa. And the question that I'll pass to her was, based on all the presentations that you heard today regarding these different elements, what are your closing thoughts around the Cocoa and Forest Initiative commitment to transparent satellite-based monitoring systems accessible to stakeholders? Caroline, I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
Wonderful, yes, thanks Etelle, and hi everyone. So just hearing the conversation today, I think first of all, congratulations to everyone that's spoken on the progress to transparent monitoring. It's exciting to see all the great work that's been done. One key reflection I had, having been involved in the CFI since its inception, is that we're now at a point in time where I think it's quite clear from this call where we have over 5 national land cover maps. There's more than that. Not all those on the call are represented. And it now appears we have different data sets that have different definitions of forests, different methodologies for calculating deforestation, therefore making it difficult to compare the insights surfaced by these data sets, which risks creating confusion for CFI stakeholders themselves, as well as for the world looking at the success of the CFI. And I wanted to circle on this point because last year during the CFI mapping workshop, which had both Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire representatives from the government, from NGOs, from service providers, there was a call to action by that group, the real voices of the CFI, to avoid this very scenario, to try and align, collaborate, pool resources together to develop the needed data sets and make them accessible. So I would just resurface that, just reminding those of us that were in that meeting or that were not, that the CFI voices did voice that. And it seems like we have created a lot of innovation, which is great, but it's time to maybe recircle back on that call to action of how can we actually streamline these efforts for impact and to demonstrate progress. So I just wanted to really flag that. Again, there might be multiple data sets that are useful. They can answer different questions, but I think it's due time for the CFI stakeholders to really circle back and say, what are the data sets we need? Which are the ones we're going to have access to and scale so that we can actually start taking action and measuring the impacts of that over time. That would be my kind of call to the CFI and just a reflection on what we've heard from stakeholders in the past.
Thank you, Caroline. You're so knowledgeable about these issues of global mapping, given your Global Forest Watch experience. Of course, that's, as its name indicates, both global and very well established. So there's a couple other questions that have come up. Laurent Foubert, do you consider sharing the Ivory Coast dataset, including mapping of cooperatives? We're very interested in it. So the Mighty Earth mapping is completely free and accessible to the general public. I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations with anyone who doesn't understand our map. It may not be as user-friendly and beautiful as it should be. We're going to try to make it better for October. We're working on the interface and the functionality of it. But I can say that Paola has maybe already answered part of the question Laurent asked, which is the vivid economics land use mapping and deforestation alert mapping is freely accessible to, I think, anyone in the Ivorian government and anyone who applies. But for the general public, one must apply to the Ivorian government. It's available to NGOs upon request. So that's one answer. And then another question, which was from Anne-Marie Nijmeier to all the panelists. What's the resolution that the Vivid Economics platform is using? That resolution is 10 meters by 10 meters. And Maria also asked how much ground truthing has been done. So the answer is about 10 ground truthing missions in the Southwest. And Anne-Marie also asked, how has it been proven that cocoa was a driver of deforestation? And I can take a stab at answering that, which is that cocoa does have a sort of visually significant different footprint. And also ground truthing helps to ensure that you're really honing in on cocoa. Some things stand out immediately and look very different, like palm oil and mining. Some things don't stand out as much and require more ground truthing, like coffee. There's a question from one of our panelists, James, to all the panelists, which was, does CFI in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire explicitly set out to address degradation outside of gazetted protected forests. I think we might have someone from CFI here. I think Ethan is here. I can take a stab at answering it, and Ethan, maybe if you could unmute yourself, you could perhaps speak to this as well. My understanding is that CFI explicitly sets out to address not only degradation and deforestation in protected areas, but all forest loss, all tree cover loss. And certainly Mighty Earth believes that there shouldn't be any legal or illegal deforestation for cocoa. That's the standard now in palm oil. It's not just that there's no illegal deforestation. Most companies strive to have no deforestation in their palm oil. That's the norm for leading companies in other commodities as well. Ethan, if I was mistaken on that, please feel free to chime in, or someone else from CFI if I'm mistaken on that. And there's a question from SMW Robert Yapou. Perhaps this is also a question for Caroline, actually. A recent publication by the Global Forest Watch indicated a decrease of deforestation in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana of 50% between 2018 and 2019. So how do we explain the increase of deforestation revealed by Vivid Economics? I don't know if Vivid, Paola and Caroline, you can chime in on that question, please.
Happy to. I think one thing to remember is the differences in the goals of these data sets. So GFW provides freely accessible pan-tropical primary forest loss data over the last decade. So that's what we're looking at, and that's what those numbers were pertaining to. It appears that there are some differences between our definitions of primary forest and that of Vivid's, as well as the time periods we're looking at, as well as the methods. So I think to be able to thoroughly answer that, that would require a comparison between methodology documents, which we'd be happy to collaborate on, but I think we have to remember that there are different time periods and definitions we're working with here and different methods, which circles back to my comment previously. We now have all these different data sets. So it would be useful to kind of have it clear what they're saying. But it seems to me that Vivid's data set has a bit more larger spread of forest they're looking at, potentially beyond primary forests, the way that we define it at GFW. But Paola, I'll let you speak to that as well.
Paola, you chime in.
Yeah, just really quickly. So I completely agree just with Caroline, just basically the differences could stem, one, on the definition of what primary forest is, two, it depends on the data being used. We use Sentinel data, Global Forest Watch uses Landsat, and then it also depends on the methodology being used. So Global Forest Watch uses a sort of algorithm that sort of applies to all rainforests or like primary forests in the world, whereas we've tailored it more like for Ivory Coast, which could also explain some of the differences. Doesn't mean that one is better, the other is like worse. It just means that both serve different purposes.
Yes, and just to add to that full agreement, I would say if you'd like insights on our methods, we make all of our detailed methods publicly available through peer-reviewed processes. So happy to send anyone who's interested in that those details.
Wonderful. And I see that there was a clarification from Daniel Abu from Tropinbos, just confirming what I had said, that CFI is explicit in addressing degradation, even if in the off-reserve areas. So good to have that confirmed. That was accurate. And then there's another question from SMW Robert Yapou, which is, I think, directed to Jérôme. Airbus indicated, or earthworm Airbus indicated that it is possible to detect forest disturbance under the canopy. Is that possible? And how about the other systems, Vivid's, Intelligence, Ecometrica? Is this also possible for you? So perhaps Jérôme, if you can confirm, and then we'll pass it on to Niels and Sarah and Paola.
Yeah, I don't want to compare, the different system here. Like I said in the presentation I did, we did a lot of trials before coming to the result we have. Like we have a complete cover with sampling, 365 samplings in the Cavally Forest Reserve, comparing what we have seen on the ground with what Airbus, the satellite of Airbus, have seen and things like that. So for me, you cannot speak about, you know, forest deforestation under the canopy. It has no science if you speak about deforestation under the canopy. But you are able with the radar, the Terrasa X radar, you are able to see the disturbance of the, you know, of the beneath the canopy. That one, it's through the observation we have done on the ground, and you know, I don't want to discuss furthermore about you cannot see deforestation under the canopy. It is something we have experienced on the ground. We've like I'm saying, we covered totally the Cavally Forest Reserve, and we came with this result. But I know that a lot of discussions have gone through, you know, how can you see deforestation under the canopy and things like that. And for me, we just need to come maybe with what we have seen so far on the ground, and show you the comparison with the radar imagery we got from Germany, from Airbus Germany. But it was not just, you know, one-day exercise. I mean, we started in November 2017 till end of the year with you know, comparing the satellite imageries, comparing also with the optic imageries, radar imageries, and so on, to come to this result.
Thank you so much, Jérôme.
Yeah.
And can I have a quick confirmation from Sarah, Niels, and Paola that you are in fact able to detect forest degradation for agroforestry and not just deforestation for monocropping?
On my end, so this is Paola. No, on my end, we only detect forest cover loss. So what was forest and is not forest anymore.
Okay.
So this is, we don't detect any degradation under the canopy. First of all, because it's technically very difficult, and second of all, because when you go and verify deforestation alerts on the ground, you actually just have to turn your head to see further degradation nearby under the canopy.
Right. And Sarah, can you speak to that as well?
Yeah, I agree with Paola. It's incredibly challenging to see that kind of level of disturbance below the canopy. We've certainly done some trials to look at it, using sort of drone technology. I think realistically, having a sort of an active sensor is the only way you're going to be able to do it. LiDAR is the sort of gold standard, but obviously it's incredibly expensive and impractical. But I think new data sets that are coming live, such as the JEDI data, can be really powerful with that. And I know the University of Edinburgh is doing some work using biomass as a proxy and sort of making biomass estimates using this JEDI data. So I think they're hoping to publish something in the next few months or so. So I'm definitely happy to kind of signpost people to that work as it becomes available.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And Niels, can you speak to this as well?
Yeah, I think technically the question is, what is a canopy? If you have a very much closed, intact, fully closed canopy, it will be very hard with optical, very high resolution imagery, but also with TerraSAR-X, which of the radar sensors doesn't penetrate very deep in the canopy to detect anything that's underneath it. So if you have, say, more open canopies, then it's possible to say, look, true or not true, but a side in between. That's what I wanted to say. In between the crowns, and also with TerraSAR-X, then I believe that you can see further clearing. But if we're talking about intact forests, I think LiDAR is actually the only way that you can penetrate a closed canopy. So with the space LiDAR, indeed, we are also using this to calculate carbon stocks. And I think that is one way to say indirectly something if you have a very much closed canopy. So indeed, the JEDI, that's the JEDI NASA space LiDAR, that is one affordable way, because airborne LiDAR is still very expensive, especially if you want to fly that every year. So that would be my response.
Thank you, Niels. So I see we still have, oh yes, please, Jérôme.
No, Etelle, I just want to say, and Niels, thank you for your answer. I just want to say that, you know, where people are planting cocoa, it cannot be closed canopy, because the cocoa themselves, the leaves, they need the sun to do the photosynthesis. So you need somehow some open, you know, the light has to come down to the cocoa leaves so that they can grow. So it's where you can have actually this small change happening on the ground that can be, you know, seen detected by the Terasa Act.
Thank you so much, Jérôme. So we are now 30 minutes over time. I was a very poor timekeeper, but it was fascinating. I couldn't help just wanting to hear more and more from all of the different speakers here. We have 4 additional questions that we're not going to get to today, but we'll get to them in writing with the recording and the answers and all the slides going to everybody who signed up for this and also on our website. And I just wanted to extend a big and warm thank you to all of our participants, all of our panelists. And I think that there's one really strong leitmotif that emerged from all of the presentations, which is that many great things are happening, but that we need more synergy, more coordination, more oversight, more coherence. This is an enormous task, and going about the mapping work and the traceability work and finding a way to turn that mapping and traceability into accountability and change on the ground is a mammoth Herculean undertaking for which some really intense coordination will be necessary so that we don't end up siloed and working in ways that are duplicative or at cross purposes. And so I think today was a positive step in that direction. And I know there have been steps before that conference that Caroline alluded to. I think we'll have another bite at the apple in October. We'll try and organize another event, probably longer, and with breakout sessions and more interactive, and hopefully breakout sessions for different regions, so we can continue to strive to work better together and stronger together. So a big thank you and goodbye to everyone.